Hi guys, my name is Ben Guilford. I'm the owner of the Firebrick Company, and in this video I'm going to be telling you all about how the weather can affect your wood-fired oven. So if you're watching this, you're probably in the research phase of your oven building journey. Maybe you've stumbled on our website or watched one of our videos, seen our ovens and thought, that's the one, that's what I want. And now you're picturing it in your backyard. Maybe you've got a spot picked out for it out in the garden, out in the open, looking beautiful, like you see in many of the photos on our website. One of the things that we want you to understand, and that many people have no idea about, is that wood-fired ovens are not actually waterproof. Now you might hear that and go, whoa, hold on. I've just been on your website and I've seen so many examples of ovens built outside. Are you telling me that they're falling apart or something? No, not at all. Just because they're not waterproof doesn't mean the water causes them to dissolve, okay? They're not the Wicked Witch of the West, all right? What I'm talking about is the tendency of wood-fired ovens, traditional wood-fired ovens built with refractory materials, to absorb water and hold it like a big sponge. Because that's what refractory materials do. Refractory materials do two things really, really well. One, they resist high temperatures, and that's why we use them, okay? These fire bricks here are rated to 1,350 degrees Celsius. The other thing that refractory materials do really, really well is absorb water. In fact, every single refractory material on the face of the planet is absorbent. It's porous. It will soak up water and hold it like a sponge. Okay, now that doesn't mean that those materials will break down. It just means they're holding water now, and that is going to affect the way your oven behaves. It's going to affect the way your oven performs. All right, so you're watching this and going, all right, so if I build my oven outside, out in the open, it's going to absorb rainwater. But I guess, is that a problem? Well, and the answer is, well, that depends. It depends on two factors. First factor is your local climate. The second is the volume of water that's being held in your oven. So for the sake of this discussion, I'm going to break us up into two groups. We have those who live in warm climates and those who live in a cold climate. All right, and I'll define a cold climate as a place where you experience at least 48 hours of freezing temperatures at a time. Okay, so in a place like that, if you were to take a bucket of water and put it outside, in 2 days, you'd find that bucket would be one big block of ice. All right, now in a warm climate, let's say where I grew up in Gippsland in Australia, in winter, if I put a bucket of water outside, I would find that it would get a skin of ice on it. In the middle of winter, overnight, I'd get a little bit of ice on the top of that bucket. But during the day, it would thaw out and become water again. So that's a warm climate. So hopefully from that analogy, you can tell if you're in the warm climate camp or in the cold climate camp. Now, I'm going to start off by talking about those in a warm climate, but everything that I say about the warm climate, folks, is going to apply to those who live in the cold climate as well. Okay, so cold climate guys, don't switch off. All right, this is for you too, but once we've dealt with the warm climate side of things, I'll talk about the additional things that you need to consider in your part of the world. If you live in a warm climate, the only thing you need to consider is the volume of water that's being held in your oven when you go to fire it next. Okay, so that's the amount of water that's been absorbed by your oven from the last firing up into the next firing. And the amount of water that gets absorbed is influenced by two factors. You have the frequency with which you're using the oven, and you have the rainfall that you experience in your area. Okay, if you live in an area that experiences very little rainfall, you don't have to use your oven all that often for it to stay dry. Because if you live on the edge of the desert, then you're getting so little rainfall, you might only use your oven a couple of times a year, but it's always going to be dry because it's getting very little rain on it. If you don't live in the desert, which is probably most of us, then your oven's going to be experiencing a bit more rainfall. If you used it really regularly, so you use the oven very often, maybe you fired it up every 3 days, then even though you're getting quite regular rain, the oven doesn't get a chance to absorb much water because it's being used so often, right? And so if that's you, if you're watching this and you think, I'm in one of those camps, then you don't really need to worry about water too much at all, okay? Because the oven would absorb so little, you would barely notice it when you went to fire the oven again. If, however, you're more like me, maybe life's a little busy, and as much as you might like to fire the oven twice a week, it's not really practical for you. You may only be using the oven maybe, say, once or twice a month. And maybe, like me, you live in a relatively high rainfall area, so I'm not on the edge of the desert. If that's you, then your oven is actually going to be absorbing a moderate amount of water in between firings. Because let's say a month goes past, it gets rained on 4 or 5 times, that's going to be a moderate amount of water being absorbed by the oven. So when you go to fire it next, well, what's it going to do? It's just going to impact the performance. Instead of the oven heating up nice and quickly, it's going to take quite a lot longer to heat up because the fire, the energy from that fire is being used to drive out all of this moisture instead of just heating up nice, dry refractories, okay? And instead of the oven cooling down really slowly and gradually, it's going to cool down relatively rapidly because the insulation materials that surround the oven are damp. And when they're damp, they become more thermally conductive. They pass more heat through them. And that means the oven's going to cool down more rapidly than you'd like. Okay, so the overall effect of a moderate amount of water in the oven is, it's annoying. It's not what I want you to experience as one of my customers. I want you to be firing up a nice, dry oven and enjoying it, okay? Not firing up a slightly damp oven, waiting for it to heat up, and then watching it cool down faster than you'd like. So that's those two scenarios. So you've got a small amount of water, not an issue. A moderate amount of water can be frustrating. But then we have the extreme end of the scale when the oven is saturated. Let's say you left the oven sitting out in the rain for several months. You're not using it very often, you live in quite a wet climate. It's going to get a lot of rain on it and it's going to absorb quite a lot of that rain. So with enough time and enough rain, your oven can become completely saturated. Now, imagine I had a completely saturated oven. If I got a massive roaring fire going in that oven straight away, what do you instinctively think could happen? If you're thinking about steam, you are on the right track. So getting a massive fire going in a really wet oven is going to create a significant amount of steam. And in some very rare extreme cases, you could experience a burst of steam in the wall or the floor of the oven, which could damage the oven and be dangerous to the person using it. Okay, and that is something that we want you to avoid at all costs, right? So now, if you're watching this and please don't freak out. don't panic. And you might even be watching this saying, that's my oven. I think my oven might be really wet. If that's the case, don't worry. It's not the end of the oven. We can bring it back. We just need to slowly dry it out. Okay, so if this is you, if you have a wet oven, the solution's really simple. You're just going to get small fires going in the oven. You're going to do our curing fires. We have a whole video. I'll link it in the description. You're going to do our curing fires process again, where you start with really small fires, working your way up to those big firings again, which is going to slowly, gently drive all that moisture out of your oven, leaving it as good as new. Okay, so just because your oven gets saturated does not mean that your warranty is void. It does not mean that it's damaged the oven. It's what you do from there that really matters. Please don't watch this and think, oh my goodness, if the oven gets wet, it's the end of it. It's not at all. It's just, it's important that you know how to manage it if it does become waterlogged. But really, the best thing is to avoid that in the first place. And that's actually why I put this video together, is so that when you're doing this planning, you start thinking about, all right, how can I protect the oven from the weather so that it's always kept nice and dry, or at least we're minimizing the amount of water that's getting into it. There's a few ways that you could go about that. The best way would be to build the oven undercover. And if you have that available to you as an option, if you're looking around your backyard and you're thinking, actually, I could put it under the pergola over there, then I would really encourage you to do that for two reasons. Firstly is it keeps the oven completely dry, which is great. But secondly, it means that you're kept completely dry when you're using the oven, because you'd be surprised how often it's going to rain when you want to get the oven fired up and cook for your friends and family. Okay, so if you have the option of putting the oven fully under a roof, then go for it. But I remember my first house where I built my first oven, it had a very small veranda. It was pretty tiny, and I ended up putting my oven half in and half out of my pergola. So I put the mouth of the oven under the pergola, put the flue up through the roof, and I had the body, the dome of the oven, sitting out in the rain. That works really well too, okay? And in a warm climate, totally fine. That's actually going to keep the vast majority of water out of your oven, because water would have to really come in sideways in order to get to the mouth of the oven and be absorbed. The dome of the oven itself is actually quite easy to waterproof in a warm climate. We have a couple of solutions there for you to help keep that completely watertight. Another way you could do it is to put the oven off the edge of your pergola so that none of it is underneath. That's not my preferred way. We're now starting to get the oven out, get a little bit more rain on it. But if you considered, if I had a roof overhead here and you're the oven, the rain that's coming this way is going to be caught by the roof. And so most rain won't get to the mouth of the oven anyway. It'll only be rain coming in from the other way that might sort of get to it. So I've done that as well. That is effective. It's not as good as having the oven under cover. The other thing to consider is water is going to run down your flue in that example. It will collect on the walls of the flue, run down it, and then it will try to find its way into the oven from there. So that's something to consider as well. If you're building under a pergola, near a pergola, my preference would be for you to put it under the pergola and run the flue up through the roof so that any water running down the flue is collected at the roof, not running down onto the top of the oven. Okay, and from there, if none of those are an option for you, if you're thinking, that would be nice, I would love that, but I really can't, then by all means, build it out in the open. But I would really encourage you to consider using some covers for it to protect it from the weather when you're not using it. Now, we have a couple of options here for you. The one option that we can sell you would be our wood-fired oven weather guard, which is a stainless steel housing that goes over the mouth of the oven when you're not using it. It's going to keep about 80% of the rain out of the oven. So if you're using your oven once a month, at least, then the weather guard should be enough to keep your oven relatively dry. If you're using your oven less than once a month, I would really encourage you to think about getting a canvas cover made to put over your oven that would actually go over the whole oven and over the edges of your stand, so that any water that falls on the oven just runs right off. Now, I know you hear that and you think, but Ben, it's so pretty. I don't want to cover it. And I get it. I completely understand. It's a beautiful thing. And I love looking at my ovens, but you have to understand that it's not just a sculpture. It's not just something that's pretty. It is a functional thing, and it does have limitations. It's not waterproof. So if you want your oven to perform well, then you really need to keep it as dry as you possibly can. All right, so it's a shame. I wish we didn't have to. It would be awesome if you could just leave it out in the rain and the rain just bounced off it. But that's the nature of refractory materials. There are none in existence that are non-porous. So unfortunately, that's what we have to live with. All right, so now I hope for warm climate, guys, I hope that makes sense and that's been helpful for you. We're here to help with any questions you have, so please feel free to reach out to us, call, email, etc. But now I want to talk to those who are in a cold climate. If you live in a cold climate, I'm pretty confident you've already figured out the thing that you need to think about, and that is freezing. If you go into winter and your oven is holding water, that water is going to freeze and expand, and that's going to cause some very serious cracking and damage to your oven, which is just something that we really want you to avoid. Okay, so there is a rule that we have for people building an oven in a cold climate, and it might not be what you think. Some of our competitors have in their warranty, if your oven gets wet at all, the warranty is void. And that's not the case for our ovens. However, in cold climate, the rule for you is your oven must be completely dry throughout winter. And by winter, I mean any period of freezing conditions. Your oven has to be kept dry during those times so that there's no water in the oven to freeze. If your oven is completely dry, you can get it as cold as you like. You can take it down to -70. I don't care. These materials are actually rated to handle massive changes in temperature. So you could actually take an oven that's sitting at this incredibly cold temperature and get a big fire going in it. Providing that oven is dry, no problems. Absolutely fine. Okay, but it needs to be kept dry. So if the rule is the oven needs to be kept dry throughout winter, how do you achieve that? Now, there's two ways you could achieve that in my mind. One is keep the oven dry all the time. Tick, done. If the oven's dry all the time, then it's definitely going to be dry throughout winter. The other way would be to allow the oven to get wet during the warmer months of the year. Obviously, you're going to try to keep it as dry as you can, but then prior to winter, you dry the oven out. Okay, if it's got a lot of water in it, you go through the curing fires, and then you do some really big firings. I'm talking burn 300 pounds of firewood. You get that oven cranking hot over several firings to make sure the oven is completely bone dry. Then you winterize it. You take the flue off, put a big doona or blanket over the oven to sort of protect it, and then a big heavy duty tarpaulin over that you sort of ratchet strap around your stand to protect the oven for the winter. Okay, now out of those two methods, I have a preferred method, and that would of course be keeping the oven dry all the time. The reason that's my preferred method is that it will work forever. Like it's guaranteed to work. Whereas the winterizing method can go wrong. What if maybe you intended to dry out your oven, but something happened, you just weren't able to. Maybe there's a family emergency or something like that, and you just didn't get the opportunity to dry the oven out. Actually, probably more likely is a storm comes through early, at the end of autumn or fall, and a storm comes through and it brings freezing temperatures with it that you were not expecting. And you hadn't fired the oven, you hadn't dried it out, you weren't ready. Okay, and over the course of decades, statistically, something like that is likely to happen where you don't get the opportunity to dry the oven out before the freezing conditions kick in. So in my mind, the winterizing method is actually very useful in the short term. So for example, we have a lot of customers say to us, Ben, I'm gonna put this oven under a roof, but I can't do it this year. It's too big a project. The oven build is its own project, then the roofing, that's a whole extra project. And I say, no problems, that's fine. Get it built before winter, get it dry. So you've got to remember, you've got to get it built and cured before winter kicks in. So get it built, get it cured, get it fired up, and then winterize it, and then next year, or maybe the year after, you build that structure over it to protect it, okay? Now, another way of doing it, so the full roof is the preferred way, because then you're kept dry as well, and you can use the oven all year round. But if that's not practical, then there is one more method you could consider, which is building the oven into an enclosure. So you build a little house over the oven. So you take the walls of your stand up around the oven, do it like a pitched roof over the top of it, and then all you actually end up seeing of the oven is just an opening. And then you can create a weather door that goes over that opening that blocks any rain from getting in to the refractory materials inside where it would be absorbed. Okay, we're going to have some videos for you on how to build an enclosure like that. That's going to be coming out soon. But hopefully that helps you. If you're in that cold climate, the rule is you need to keep your oven completely dry throughout winter. So this isn't my most exciting video, but it is one of the most important ones because I really want all of our customers to fully understand how wood-fired ovens work, how they deal with the weather, because once you know that and once you understand that, you're informed and you can make informed decisions about where you put the oven, how often you use it, how you're going to protect it. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed the video, but I am expecting that some of you will have some questions. And please know that myself and my team are really happy to answer them. Feel free to send us an email give us a call, you can send us text messages. We are more than happy to answer any questions you have about taking care of your oven, how to deal with water, and things like that. So please do not hesitate to reach out to us. But from myself and my team, thank you very much for watching. See you next time.